My name is Ethan Parker, and for nearly 6 years, my backyard garden was my pride and joy. Every spring I spent countless weekends planting tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, strawberries, and anything else I could fit into the raised beds behind my house. It wasn't just about saving money. The garden helped me unwind after long workdays and gave me something meaningful to build with my own hands. Then, almost overnight, my harvest started disappearing. At first I blamed squirrels, birds, and even raccoons. But the losses became too specific to ignore. Perfectly ripe tomatoes vanished while untouched green ones remained. Entire rows of strawberries disappeared the day before I planned to pick them. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. What I didn't know was that the culprit lived right next door. And when I finally discovered who had been helping themselves to my garden, the evidence I uncovered shocked the entire neighborhood. Bro, I genuinely couldn't believe how far this situation would escalate. The strange disappearances continued for weeks, and each time I walked into my backyard, the frustration grew a little stronger. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Fruits and vegetables weren't being damaged like animals usually do. They were being picked cleanly, almost professionally. The ripest produce would vanish overnight while everything else remained untouched. That detail kept bothering me. I started paying much closer attention. Every evening after work, I would check the garden, mentally noting which tomatoes were almost ready and which strawberries would be perfect the next morning. Then I would wake up and discover half of them gone. It felt like somebody was following the same schedule I was. The timing couldn't have been worse. That year had been my most successful garden yet. The tomato plants were overflowing. My pepper plants were producing faster than I could use them. Friends and family were already expecting baskets of fresh vegetables. Instead, I found myself constantly explaining why there wasn't much left to share. The more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became of my next-door neighbor, Linda. Around the neighborhood, she had developed a reputation for treating community property as if it belonged to her. She wasn't openly hostile, but she always seemed to believe that rules somehow applied differently to everyone else. I began noticing little things that previously wouldn't have caught my attention. Whenever I worked in the garden, Linda seemed unusually interested in what was growing. If I harvested vegetables, she somehow knew exactly what I had picked. If new strawberries appeared, she seemed aware of them almost immediately. At first I dismissed these observations as coincidence, but the pattern kept repeating. Then one afternoon I came home earlier than expected. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed movement near the fence separating our properties. By the time I reached the backyard, whoever had been there was gone. But several ripe tomatoes that I had checked that very morning had disappeared. That was the moment everything changed. I stopped assuming and started investigating. Over the next few days, I quietly documented the garden's condition. I took photos before leaving for work and compared them to what remained when I returned. The differences were undeniable. Produce was vanishing during very specific windows of time. Bro, hearing this would have sounded paranoid if there weren't pictures proving it. Every new photo made the mystery harder to explain away. The final straw came when nearly every ripe strawberry disappeared less than 12 hours before I planned to harvest them. Months of care had gone into those plants. Watering, fertilizing, protecting them from pests, and patiently waiting for the perfect moment. Seeing empty stems where bright red berries had been felt surprisingly personal. That's exactly how entitlement works in real life. The thief wasn't just taking vegetables. They were taking the time and effort behind them. At that point, I decided speculation wasn't enough. I wanted proof. Real proof. The following weekend, I purchased several weatherproof security cameras and began planning the most thorough surveillance setup my backyard had ever seen. And what those cameras would eventually record was far worse than I expected. The cameras were installed discreetly enough that nobody would notice them unless they knew exactly where to look. For the first few days, nothing happened. I checked the footage every evening and found nothing but squirrels, birds, and the occasional neighborhood cat wandering through the yard. Part of me wondered if I had overreacted. Then, on the fourth morning, I opened the recordings and nearly dropped my coffee. There was Linda. The footage showed her calmly stepping through a gap near the fence line, walking directly to my raised beds, and harvesting vegetables as if she owned the property. There was no hesitation. No confusion. No attempt to verify whose garden it was. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed she had every right to be there. I genuinely couldn't believe what I was watching. Months of mystery were solved in less than 2 minutes of video. What shocked me even more was that it wasn't a one-time incident. As I reviewed older recordings, I discovered multiple visits. Different days. Different harvests. The pattern stretched back weeks. For instead of confronting her immediately, I kept collecting evidence. Every recording strengthened my case. Meanwhile, Linda became even bolder, taking larger amounts each visit. And that's when an unexpected twist appeared. The cameras didn't just capture Linda stealing from my garden. They captured her entering other neighbors' yards too. Once I realized the footage showed more than just my garden, everything escalated fast. I spent an entire weekend reviewing recordings and organizing timestamps. The evidence was overwhelming. Linda wasn't accidentally crossing property lines or making an innocent mistake. The videos showed a consistent pattern of entering multiple yards and helping herself to whatever caught her attention. I quietly reached out to a few neighbors and asked if they had noticed anything missing. The responses were immediate. One neighbor mentioned disappearing flowers. Another had been losing vegetables for months. A third complained about small garden tools mysteriously vanishing and reappearing days later. Suddenly, pieces of a much larger puzzle started falling into place. Instead of confronting Linda directly, I shared the footage with the affected homeowners. Bro, the reaction was unbelievable. Everyone had suspected something strange was happening, but nobody expected clear video evidence. Within days, several neighbors had their own camera clips showing similar behavior. The situation eventually reached the HOA board. Ironically, the same organization that often obsessed over minor yard violations was now forced to deal with repeated complaints backed by undeniable proof. When the board reviewed the footage, the conversation changed completely. Linda could deny rumors. She could argue opinions. But she couldn't argue with multiple videos showing exactly what happened. For the first time, her actions had consequences, and karma was finally catching up. The weeks that followed were surprisingly quiet. After the HOA reviewed the evidence and several neighbors submitted formal complaints, Linda's backyard visits came to an abrupt end. No more missing tomatoes. No more disappearing strawberries. No more mysterious losses across the neighborhood. For the first time all season, my garden remained exactly as I left it. The HOA eventually issued penalties and required her to address the complaints through official channels. More importantly, the entire neighborhood now knew what had been happening. Her reputation, which she had spent years building, unraveled much faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, my garden flourished. The harvest I had worked so hard for finally stayed where it belonged. Friends and family received baskets of fresh vegetables again, and I was able to enjoy the results of months of effort without constantly wondering what would disappear overnight. The funniest part? The cameras that exposed everything never had to record another incident. Their job was already done. Looking back, this entire situation taught me something important. Entitled people often keep pushing boundaries because nobody challenges them. The moment real evidence appears, the story changes. Bro, I still can't believe a simple backyard garden ended up exposing behavior that affected half the neighborhood. That's exactly how karma works sometimes. Not through revenge or arguments, but through patience, documentation, and letting the facts speak for themselves. In the end, the harvest stayed, the truth came out, and the consequences landed exactly where they belonged. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Have you ever caught a neighbor doing something unbelievable? Let us know in the comments, and don't miss the next HOA karma story.